When The Mummy Returns arrived in theaters in 2001, it was already benefiting from the enormous momentum created by the success of its predecessor. Unlike many sequels that spend years in uncertain development or struggle to justify their existence, this project was almost inevitable. The first film had become one of Universal Pictures' biggest commercial successes of the late 1990s, proving that audiences still had a strong appetite for large-scale adventure films that combined supernatural horror, action, romance, comedy, and archaeological mystery. The studio recognized almost immediately that they possessed a franchise capable of becoming one of their flagship properties, and discussions about a sequel began long before the original film had even completed its theatrical run. The origins of The Mummy Returns are closely connected to the unexpected revival of a cinematic monster that had largely disappeared from mainstream popularity for decades. Universal's classic monster films had once dominated Hollywood during the 1930s and 1940s. Characters such as Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolf Man, and the Mummy had become icons of horror cinema. However, by the late 20th century, these characters were viewed as relics of an earlier era. While occasional remakes appeared, none had managed to transform these classic monsters into blockbuster franchises suitable for modern audiences. Everything changed in 1999 when director Stephen Sommers reimagined The Mummy. Rather than creating a straightforward horror film, he combined elements inspired by classic adventure serials, treasure hunting stories, supernatural fantasy, historical epics, and action spectacles. The resulting film felt closer in spirit to Indiana Jones than a traditional Gothic horror. Instead of emphasizing fear above all else, it focused on excitement, humor, romance, and nonstop momentum. This creative decision dramatically broadened the film's appeal. The original film earned hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide, significantly exceeding expectations. Universal executives quickly realized that audiences were responding not simply to the monster itself, but to the chemistry between Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell and Rachel Weisz's Evelyn. Their adventurous partnership became the emotional core of the movie, while Arnold Vosloo's Imhotep provided a memorable supernatural antagonist. The combination created a formula that audiences enthusiastically embraced. As plans for the sequel began, Universal faced an important creative question. Should the follow-up simply repeat the formula that had already succeeded, or should it expand the mythology into something even larger? The studio ultimately chose expansion. Rather than creating another isolated adventure involving resurrected mummies, the sequel would broaden the fictional universe considerably. Ancient Egyptian mythology would become more elaborate. Entirely new historical backstories would be introduced, and the scale of both the action and supernatural elements would increase dramatically. Stephen Sommers returned not only as director, but also as the principal creative force behind the screenplay. This continuity proved crucial, because the same filmmaker who had established the tone of the first movie was guiding the sequel. There was a strong sense of consistency throughout development. Sommers understood exactly what audiences had enjoyed the first time and believed that the sequel should feel like a natural evolution rather than a complete reinvention. Instead of beginning with a blank slate, Sommers started by asking what had happened to the central characters after the first film. Several years had passed since Rick and Evelyn defeated Imhotep. During that time, they had married and started a family. This decision immediately distinguished the sequel from many Hollywood follow-ups. Rather than resetting the characters back to their previous status quo, the story acknowledged that their experiences had changed them. Rick was no longer merely a fortune-seeking adventurer. Evelyn had grown from an awkward librarian into a confident explorer. Most significantly, they now had a son named Alex, whose presence introduced entirely new emotional stakes. The addition of Alex was not simply an attempt to include a child character for younger audiences. From a storytelling perspective, he fundamentally altered the narrative dynamics. In the original film, Rick and Evelyn mainly risked their own lives. In the sequel, they were responsible for protecting someone else. This transformed every dangerous situation into something more emotionally engaging, because failure would now have consequences extending beyond the heroes themselves. Another major development involved expanding Evelyn's own mythology. In the first film, she was presented primarily as an intelligent Egyptologist with an adventurous spirit. During screenplay development for the sequel, Sommers decided to give her a much deeper historical connection to ancient Egypt itself. Through reincarnation and ancestral memory, Evelyn would become linked to Princess Nefertiti, the daughter of Pharaoh Seti I. This revelation elevated her role from curious historian to someone directly connected to the ancient conflicts driving the story. This creative decision reflected one of Sommers' favorite storytelling techniques, connecting present-day protagonists with forgotten legends from the distant past. Rather than having characters merely discover history, he preferred making them part of history. As a result, the sequel frequently moves between ancient Egypt and the modern era, creating parallels between past and present that reinforce the film's central themes of destiny, sacrifice, and eternal conflict. The screenplay also sought to enlarge the mythological scope beyond Imhotep himself. In the first film, Imhotep represented the primary supernatural threat. For the sequel, another legendary figure would enter the story, the Scorpion King. This character served both as a new antagonist and as a mythical force whose existence reached back thousands of years. His inclusion allowed the narrative to explore even older legends while presenting challenges greater than anything the heroes had previously encountered. When examining The Mummy Returns, it becomes clear that the film is more than simply a large-budget Hollywood sequel. At its center is the unmistakable creative vision of director Stephen Sommers, a filmmaker whose storytelling philosophy revolves around entertainment above all else. Rather than chasing realism or creating a dark, grounded reinterpretation of ancient mythology, Sommers embraced spectacle, imagination, humor, and relentless pacing. His approach shaped every aspect of the production, from the screenplay and performances to the action scenes and visual effects. The result is a movie that feels unmistakably like one of his creations, combining influences from classic adventure serials, fantasy epics, monster movies, and modern blockbuster filmmaking into a single cinematic experience. To understand Sommers' vision for The Mummy Returns, it is important to understand the type of filmmaker he had become by the late 1990s. Before directing The Mummy in 1999, he had worked on films that demonstrated his interest in blending genres rather than remaining confined to one. He enjoyed stories that mixed horror with comedy, action with fantasy, and historical settings with supernatural elements. Instead of separating these genres into neat categories, he believed audiences could enjoy all of them simultaneously if the storytelling maintained confidence and momentum. This philosophy became the foundation of the Mummy franchise. While many directors might have approached a mummy story as pure horror, Sommers saw something different. He imagined an adventure movie first and a horror film second. The monsters existed not simply to frighten audiences, but to create opportunities for thrilling escapes, imaginative battles, and larger-than-life storytelling. Fear was only one ingredient among many. When Universal approved a sequel, Sommers had little interest in repeating the exact formula of the first film. His vision was based on expansion. Every aspect of the movie needed to become larger, more ambitious, and more imaginative without losing the charm that had made audiences connect with the original characters. One of the most significant aspects of his directing philosophy was his belief that sequels should reward returning audiences rather than simply imitate previous successes. He wanted viewers to feel that Rick O'Connell, Evelyn, Jonathan, and the rest of the cast had genuinely lived several more years since the events of the first film. Instead of resetting everyone back to their original personalities, he allowed them to grow. Rick was now a husband and father. Evelyn had become more confident, physically capable, and emotionally mature. Jonathan remained the comic relief, but possessed greater loyalty and courage beneath his selfish instincts. This evolution reflected Sommers' understanding that audiences become emotionally invested in characters over time. A sequel succeeds not merely because larger explosions appear on screen, but because viewers enjoy watching familiar characters confront new challenges. Another defining feature of Sommers' artistic vision was his commitment to pacing. He believed audiences should rarely become bored. Throughout The Mummy Returns, scenes transition quickly from one location to another, from action to comedy, from mystery to romance, and from quiet conversations to enormous battles. Even exposition scenes frequently contain humor, visual movement, or dramatic tension. This rapid pacing reflects an old Hollywood tradition inspired by the adventure serials of the 1930s and 1940s. Those productions were designed to keep audiences constantly excited through cliffhangers, narrow escapes, and continuous forward momentum. Sommers openly admired this style of storytelling and modernized it for contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. Instead of treating dialogue scenes as opportunities to pause the narrative, he often used them to build anticipation for the next action sequence. Information about ancient curses, hidden temples, and forgotten legends is delivered while characters are already preparing to travel or while danger is visibly approaching. The audience is rarely allowed to settle completely before another exciting event occurs. Sommers also possessed a deep appreciation for classic adventure heroes. Rick O'Connell is intentionally designed as a modern descendant of cinematic icons such as Indiana Jones and earlier pulp adventurers. However, Sommers deliberately avoided portraying Rick as a flawless action hero. Brendan Fraser's performance emphasizes humor, awkwardness, and occasional mistakes. This balance between competence and imperfection became central to Sommers' directing approach. Rick can defeat enemies in spectacular fashion, yet moments later he may fall through a collapsing floor or accidentally trigger another disaster. These imperfections make him more relatable while preventing the character from becoming emotionally distant. Similarly, Evelyn avoids becoming the stereotypical damsel in distress. Although she requires rescue at various moments, she also saves Rick multiple times throughout the story. Sommers consistently directs her as an equal participant in the adventure rather than merely someone who accompanies the hero. This reflects another element of his filmmaking philosophy: teamwork. Unlike many action films centered around one invincible protagonist, The Mummy Returns succeeds because different characters contribute unique strengths. Rick provides physical courage. Evelyn contributes intelligence and historical knowledge. Jonathan offers unexpected resourcefulness despite his comic personality. Ardith Bay supplies wisdom and military experience. Alex demonstrates bravery and quick thinking despite his youth. Sommers directs these characters as a functioning family rather than isolated heroes. Their relationships become just as important as the supernatural threats surrounding them. Visually, Sommers favored clarity over abstraction. His action scenes generally allow audiences to understand where characters are located, what objectives they are pursuing, and how the environment influences each confrontation. While the editing remains energetic, spatial relationships usually remain understandable. This approach distinguishes his style from action directors who rely heavily upon rapid cutting or intentionally confusing choreography. Sommers wanted audiences to enjoy the spectacle without becoming disoriented. His camera frequently emphasizes movement through large environments. One of the greatest strengths of The Mummy Returns is the way it constructs an expansive fictional world that feels much larger than the story unfolding on screen. Although the movie is primarily an action-adventure blockbuster, its success depends heavily on convincing audiences that ancient Egypt is more than simply a historical location. Throughout the film, history, mythology, archaeology, supernatural forces, and forgotten civilizations merge together into a living universe where thousands of years of legends continue to shape the modern world. Rather than functioning as a simple backdrop, the setting becomes one of the movie's most important characters, constantly influencing the decisions of the heroes, the motivations of the villains, and the overall direction of the narrative. Unlike many fantasy films that create entirely fictional kingdoms, The Mummy Returns builds its universe by taking recognizable elements from real history and weaving them together with original mythology. Ancient Egypt serves as the foundation, but Stephen Sommers never intended to create a historically accurate reconstruction. Instead, he presents a version of Egypt inspired by archaeological discoveries, religious myths, classic adventure novels, pulp fiction, and Hollywood spectacle. This creative approach allows audiences to immediately recognize familiar imagery while remaining open to increasingly fantastical ideas. The story opens by transporting viewers thousands of years into the past. Before the modern adventure even begins, audiences witness events set in ancient Egypt during the reign of Pharaoh Seti I. These opening scenes establish an important principle that governs the entire film's universe. The past is never truly gone. Ancient actions continue producing consequences thousands of years later. Every betrayal, every curse, every sacrifice, and every act of love echoes into the present day. This concept becomes the foundation of the movie's world-building. History is not treated as a collection of dead events stored in books or museums. Instead, history remains active, almost alive, waiting beneath the desert sands to influence modern civilization. The deserts of Egypt play an especially significant role within this fictional universe. Rather than depicting the desert simply as an empty landscape, the film transforms it into a vast archive of forgotten secrets. Every dune may conceal buried cities, hidden temples, ancient armies, magical artifacts, or supernatural dangers. The endless stretches of sand create a sense that civilization occupies only a tiny fraction of a much older and more mysterious world. This environmental storytelling reinforces one of the film's recurring themes. Humanity understands far less about its own past than it believes. The heroes repeatedly discover that beneath familiar archaeological sites lie even older civilizations and deeper mysteries. Every discovery reveals another layer of hidden history. The city of Thebes serves as one of the earliest examples of this layered world-building. It represents both an archaeological treasure and a living reminder of ancient power. Although centuries have passed since its greatest days, its monuments still dominate the landscape. Massive statues, towering columns, elaborate temples, and intricate hieroglyphics communicate the scale of a civilization that once ruled much of the known world. These environments immediately establish the tone. The audience is not exploring ordinary ruins, but entering places built for gods, kings, and immortal legends. One of the most fascinating aspects of the movie's setting is how architecture itself tells stories. Ancient temples are never presented as random collections of stone corridors. Every chamber appears designed for a specific ceremonial purpose. Large statues symbolize forgotten rulers. Hidden passages suggest secret rituals. Massive doors imply that unimaginable forces were once imprisoned behind them. Without lengthy explanations, audiences understand that these structures were built by people whose beliefs differed dramatically from those of the modern world. The architecture reflects civilizations deeply connected to religion, mythology, and supernatural power. This technique is known as environmental storytelling. Instead of explaining everything through dialogue, the world itself communicates its own history visually. The film also establishes clear rules regarding supernatural forces. Magic exists within this universe, but it follows ancient traditions connected primarily to Egyptian religion and mythology. Powerful rituals require sacred objects. Ancient texts possess genuine magical abilities. Curses remain active for thousands of years. Certain locations contain supernatural energy capable of altering reality itself. Although the exact mechanics of this magic remain mysterious, the audience gradually understands that these forces obey internal rules rather than appearing randomly. Resurrection requires specific ceremonies. Prophecies unfold according to predetermined conditions. Magical artifacts possess clearly defined purposes. These rules help the fantasy feel believable despite its extraordinary nature. Because supernatural events follow recognizable patterns, viewers accept increasingly impossible developments without feeling that the story has abandoned logic entirely. Perhaps the most significant addition to the franchise's world-building is the introduction of the Scorpion King and his forgotten empire. This expansion dramatically broadens the universe established in the first film. Instead of focusing exclusively on Imhotep and his resurrection, the sequel reaches even further into antiquity, revealing an older legend connected to divine bargains and supernatural conquest. According to the mythology presented in the film, the Scorpion King was once a mortal warrior who made a desperate pact with Anubis, the god of the dead. In exchange for ultimate military power, he surrendered his humanity and ultimately became imprisoned within his own destiny. This legend transforms the universe into something much larger than a single curse. It suggests that numerous forgotten myths exist beyond those already encountered. Imhotep is no longer the oldest or most powerful supernatural figure. Instead, he becomes one participant within an ancient hierarchy of magical forces stretching back thousands of years. This expansion gives the fictional world remarkable depth. It implies that countless other stories remain buried beneath the sands, waiting to be discovered. One of the defining reasons for the lasting popularity of The Mummy Returns is that it refuses to belong to a single genre. Instead of presenting itself as purely an action film, a horror movie, or a fantasy adventure, it combines elements from multiple genres into one seamless experience. This blending of styles became one of the trademarks of director Stephen Sommers, allowing the film to appeal to a remarkably broad audience. Fans of action could enjoy large-scale battles and daring escapes. Horror fans could appreciate ancient curses, resurrected monsters, and supernatural threats. Adventure lovers found lost cities and archaeological expeditions, while fantasy audiences experienced magic, mythical creatures, and divine powers. Comedy, romance, and even family drama were also woven into the narrative. Rather than creating conflict between these genres, the film carefully balances them so that each supports the others. The primary genre of The Mummy Returns is undoubtedly action-adventure. Nearly every scene is driven by movement, exploration, pursuit, or physical danger. The story is structured around a classic adventure formula, in which heroes travel across multiple locations while searching for ancient artifacts and attempting to prevent catastrophic events. This structure places the audience in a constant state of anticipation, as every destination promises another mystery, another trap, or another battle. Adventure stories traditionally revolve around exploration of the unknown, and this film embraces that tradition completely. Hidden temples, forgotten cities, underground tombs, ancient ruins, secret passages, and mysterious relics all form essential components of the narrative. Instead of remaining in one location, the heroes continually travel from London to Egypt and eventually into regions that seem untouched by modern civilization. Every new environment introduces different challenges, making the adventure feel unpredictable and expansive. Unlike many modern action films that focus primarily on military operations or urban crime, The Mummy Returns draws inspiration from classic treasure hunting adventures. The characters are explorers as much as they are warriors. Solving ancient puzzles proves just as important as defeating enemies. Historical knowledge becomes a weapon equal to swords or firearms. This emphasis on discovery gives the action greater purpose because every confrontation is connected to uncovering forgotten history. The action genre itself plays an enormous role in defining the movie's identity. From its opening sequence onward, moments of physical conflict appear with remarkable frequency. Sword fights, gun battles, hand-to-hand combat, horseback chases, train pursuits, collapsing temples, magical creatures, and enormous supernatural armies ensure that the pace rarely slows. However, the film approaches action differently from many contemporary blockbusters. Rather than emphasizing realism, Stephen Sommers embraces spectacle. Heroes perform daring stunts that stretch believability but remain entertaining because the movie establishes its heightened reality from the very beginning. Rick O'Connell survives impossible situations not because the film seeks realism, but but because it celebrates the larger-than-life tradition of pulp adventure heroes. This approach aligns closely with classic serial storytelling, where excitement consistently takes precedence over realism. Audiences are encouraged to enjoy the thrill of impossible escapes rather than question every physical detail. The movie's secondary genre is fantasy. Although the story begins in recognizable historical settings, supernatural elements quickly become inseparable from the narrative. Ancient gods influence human affairs. Magical artifacts possess extraordinary powers. Reincarnation shapes character identities. Curses remain active across thousands of years. The dead return to life through forbidden rituals. Entire armies emerge from mythical origins. Fantasy allows the film to explore themes that ordinary historical adventure could never fully address. Questions about destiny, immortality, divine judgment, and eternal love become central to the story. Characters are no longer simply confronting criminals or rival explorers. They are battling forces that transcend ordinary human understanding. Importantly, the fantasy elements operate according to internally consistent rules. Magic is not random. Ancient books contain specific spells. Sacred artifacts possess defined purposes. Rituals require precise conditions. This consistency helps audiences accept increasingly extraordinary events without feeling disconnected from the narrative. Closely connected to fantasy is the film's strong supernatural horror influence. Although The Mummy Returns is considerably lighter in tone than traditional horror movies, its foundation still rests upon classic monster cinema. Mummies rise from the dead. Ancient curses threaten civilization. Skeleton warriors emerge from forgotten tombs. Giant supernatural creatures attack the living. Dark rituals attempt to unleash apocalyptic destruction. Unlike psychological horror, which often creates fear through uncertainty, The Mummy Returns embraces visual horror rooted in mythology and monsters. The audience clearly sees the dangers confronting the heroes. Suspense arises not from wondering whether supernatural forces exist, but from anticipating how the characters will survive encounters with them. This approach reflects the influence of Universal's original monster films while modernizing them for blockbuster audiences. Horror remains present, but rarely overwhelms the sense of fun and excitement. Another important genre element is historical fiction. The narrative incorporates genuine figures, locations, and cultural traditions from ancient Egypt while freely blending them with fictional inventions. Pharaoh Seti I, Egyptian mythology, archaeological discoveries, and real historical locations create a recognizable foundation. Upon this base, Stephen Sommers constructs an entirely original mythology involving the Scorpion King, magical armies, reincarnation, and hidden civilizations. This blending of fact and fiction enhances immersion. Audiences recognize enough authentic historical details to accept the fictional additions more easily. The result is not intended as an educational reconstruction of history, but rather as an imaginative interpretation inspired by real civilizations. The opening sequence of The Mummy Returns serves as far more than an exciting introduction to the story. During its first 10 to 15 minutes, the film accomplishes an enormous amount of narrative work. It establishes the mythology that drives the entire plot, introduces new characters, reconnects audiences with familiar heroes, expands the fictional universe beyond the first movie, sets the emotional stakes, establishes the tone, and clearly communicates that this sequel intends to be bigger in every conceivable way. Rather than easing viewers back into the world established by the original film, director Stephen Sommers immediately announces that the scope has expanded from one ancient curse to an epic conflict spanning thousands of years. The film begins not in the modern world, but over 5,000 years in the past. This decision immediately signals an important change from the first movie. Instead of starting with contemporary characters who gradually uncover ancient history, the sequel allows the audience to witness that history directly. Viewers become participants in events that previously would have existed only as legends or archaeological discoveries. This opening accomplishes several important storytelling objectives simultaneously. First, it establishes credibility for the mythology. Rather than asking audiences simply to believe stories told by historians or explorers, the film presents ancient events as living reality. The audience witnesses these moments firsthand, creating a stronger emotional connection to the legends that will later shape the modern narrative. The first major figure introduced is the Scorpion King. Unlike Imhotep, whose motivations in the original film centered largely around forbidden love and resurrection, the Scorpion King enters the story as a military leader facing overwhelming defeat. His army has been destroyed after years of relentless warfare. Exhausted, starving, and surrounded by death, he represents the collapse of human ambition. This immediately establishes one of the film's central themes. Desperation can lead individuals to make catastrophic choices. The Scorpion King is not portrayed as purely evil during these opening moments. Instead, he is presented as a man whose impossible circumstances drive him toward a dangerous bargain. His decision to call upon Anubis introduces another major element of the film's mythology. The audience learns that gods actively influence human history within this fictional universe. However, divine intervention comes with terrible consequences. The Scorpion King receives ultimate military power in exchange for surrendering his soul. This ancient bargain becomes the foundation upon which the entire story rests. Without understanding this moment, later events involving the bracelet of Anubis, the lost city of Sheer, and the supernatural army would possess far less emotional significance. Visually, the opening immediately communicates the larger scale of the sequel. Massive battlefields stretch across the landscape. Thousands of soldiers lie defeated. Sweeping camera movements emphasize the enormity of the conflict. Unlike the first film, which began with palace intrigue and personal betrayal, The Mummy Returns introduces viewers to warfare involving entire civilizations. This escalation informs audience expectations almost immediately. If the first movie centered around resurrecting one powerful mummy, this sequel intends to explore conflicts involving armies, gods, and civilizations. The visual design of the opening also establishes the film's mythic quality. Everything appears larger than life. The ancient world is portrayed not as ordinary history, but as legendary history. Golden armor, monumental architecture, immense armies, and supernatural imagery create an atmosphere resembling epic mythology more than archaeological reconstruction. Stephen Sommers intentionally exaggerates the grandeur of ancient Egypt because the story itself functions like an ancient legend being passed down across generations. Another important storytelling technique appears during these opening scenes through the use of narration. Instead of overwhelming audiences with complex exposition delivered through dialogue, the narration efficiently summarizes thousands of years of history. This allows the film to establish essential mythology without sacrificing pacing. The narration also reinforces one of the movie's recurring ideas. History itself is a collection of stories handed down over countless generations. The audience is effectively hearing an ancient legend while simultaneously watching it unfold. The opening's emphasis on destiny becomes immediately apparent. The Scorpion King's decision is portrayed not simply as a personal choice, but as an event whose consequences echo across millennia. The audience understands that history has reached a turning point long before the modern protagonists even appear. This sense of destiny creates anticipation. Even viewers unfamiliar with the details of the plot recognize that ancient events are building towards something enormous in the present day. Following the mythological introduction, the movie transitions forward thousands of years. This shift from ancient history to the 1930s demonstrates another important aspect of the film's storytelling. Rather than separating past and present into unrelated narratives, the editing creates the impression that history flows continuously across time. Ancient actions naturally lead into modern consequences. When Rick O'Connell and Evelyn finally appear, audiences immediately notice significant changes since the previous film. Several years have passed. They are now married, living comfortably, and raising their son Alex. This brief introduction efficiently communicates character development without requiring lengthy explanations. The decision to present Rick and Evelyn as an established family rather than restarting their romantic relationship reflects confident sequel storytelling. The movie assumes audiences remember their previous adventure and rewards that familiarity by allowing the characters to continue evolving. The family dynamic also immediately changes the emotional tone of the series. In the original film, Rick and Evelyn primarily risked their own lives. Now, they carry parental responsibilities. Alex becomes both an important character and a symbol of what the heroes are fighting to protect. This addition subtly shifts audience investment. Every dangerous situation now carries greater emotional weight because innocent family members are involved. Conflict is the driving force behind every memorable adventure film, and The Mummy Returns succeeds because it layers multiple forms of conflict on top of one another instead of relying on a single central problem. Throughout the story, the audience is presented with physical battles, emotional struggles, supernatural dangers, moral choices, family responsibilities, ancient rivalries, and conflicts that span thousands of years. Each layer strengthens the others, ensuring that the narrative remains engaging from beginning to end. Rather than presenting one straightforward mission, the film constantly raises the stakes by introducing new complications that force the characters to adapt. This steady escalation is one of the primary reasons the movie maintains such a fast pace while still giving audiences emotional reasons to care about the outcome. At the heart of the story lies the central external conflict. Rick O'Connell, Evelyn, and their allies must prevent the resurrection of an unstoppable supernatural force before it destroys civilization. On its surface, this appears to be a familiar blockbuster premise. However, the film gradually reveals that this conflict is much more complicated than simply stopping another ancient curse. The villains are pursuing several interconnected objectives, each of which creates a new layer of danger. Imhotep seeks to regain ultimate power by defeating the Scorpion King. The cult of Imhotep wishes to restore their master completely. The Bracelet of Anubis is leading Alex toward the hidden city of Shear. Every storyline converges toward a single catastrophic event that threatens the entire world. Unlike many action films where the heroes simply chase a villain from one location to another, The Mummy Returns constantly places its protagonists in situations where they are reacting to events that have already been set into motion thousands of years earlier. The conflict began long before Rick and Evelyn were born. Ancient betrayals, forgotten bargains with gods, and unfinished wars continue influencing every decision made in the present. This creates the feeling that the heroes are fighting against history itself, rather than merely confronting another criminal or monster. One of the most effective storytelling choices is the way the film immediately personalizes the conflict through Alex. In many epic adventure stories, the threat to the world feels distant, because ordinary people rarely appear directly affected until the climax. Here, however, the danger becomes intensely personal almost immediately. Once Alex places the Bracelet of Anubis on his wrist, he becomes the center of the conflict. The bracelet cannot simply be removed, and it creates a magical countdown that places his life in constant danger. This changes the emotional dynamics of the narrative. Rick and Evelyn are no longer fighting because they are naturally adventurous people who enjoy solving mysteries. They are fighting because their son's life depends on them. Every action sequence now carries emotional consequences beyond simple survival. If they fail, they do not merely lose a battle. They lose their child. The introduction of parenthood fundamentally transforms Rick's role as a hero. In the first film, he was largely motivated by loyalty, courage, and his growing love for Evelyn. In the sequel, those qualities remain, but they are strengthened by his responsibility as a father. His decisions become more cautious in some situations and more reckless in others, particularly when Alex's safety is threatened. This creates an important internal conflict. Rick must constantly balance his natural instincts as an action hero with his responsibilities as a parent. Charging directly into danger may once have endangered only himself. Now it risks leaving his family without a father. This added responsibility gives greater emotional depth to his character. Evelyn experiences perhaps the film's most significant internal conflict. Throughout the story, she struggles not only against external enemies, but also against the mysterious visions connecting her to Princess Nefertiti. As fragments of ancient memories begin surfacing, she is forced to question her own identity. Are these simply dreams? Are they memories from another life? Is destiny guiding her actions, or is she still making independent choices? This psychological conflict adds another layer to the narrative. Evelyn is not merely decoding ancient inscriptions or solving archaeological puzzles. She's trying to understand herself. Her growing connection to Egypt's ancient past forces her to confront the possibility that history is not simply something she studies, but something she has personally lived. The audience experiences this uncertainty alongside her. Every vision raises new questions while reinforcing the movie's central theme that the past never truly disappears. Alex himself also faces meaningful internal struggles despite his young age. Like many children, he wants to prove that he is brave and capable rather than being treated as someone who constantly needs protection. Throughout the film, he repeatedly attempts to contribute instead of remaining a passive victim. This desire creates tension because his courage sometimes helps the heroes while also placing him in greater danger. The audience sympathizes with both perspectives. Rick and Evelyn naturally want to protect their son, while Alex understandably wants to demonstrate that he deserves to be included in the adventure. Jonathan Carnahan provides another interesting form of conflict, though one presented with considerably more humor. His constant attraction to wealth repeatedly conflicts with his loyalty to his family. Although he often appears motivated by greed, every major crisis ultimately reveals that he values Rick, Evelyn, and Alex far more than treasure. This recurring pattern becomes an important source of character development. Jonathan continually struggles between selfishness and courage. While he rarely behaves heroically at first, circumstances repeatedly force him to discover qualities he did not realize he possessed. Every great adventure film depends on memorable antagonists, and The Mummy Returns distinguishes itself by presenting far more than a single villain. Instead of relying exclusively on one evil character, the film introduces multiple antagonistic forces that operate on different levels. Some are physical opponents, others are supernatural entities, while still others represent ancient curses, impossible choices, and even the weight of history itself. Together, these threats create a narrative in which danger is constantly evolving. As the heroes overcome one obstacle, another emerges, often greater than the last. This layered approach prevents the story from becoming repetitive and allows the audience to experience different forms of tension throughout the film. The primary antagonist for most of the movie is Imhotep. Returning from the first film, he remains one of the franchise's most recognizable characters. However, his role evolves significantly in the sequel. Rather than simply repeating his previous motivation of resurrecting Enkidu, Imhotep now seeks something even greater: ultimate power through defeating the Scorpion King and commanding the army of Anubis. This expansion of his ambitions reflects the larger scale of the sequel itself. His goal is no longer personal survival, but world domination. What makes Imhotep particularly effective is that he is not a one-dimensional villain. Beneath his immense magical power lies a deeply emotional motivation. Everything he does is ultimately connected to his love for Enkidu. While his methods are cruel and destructive, his emotions remain understandable. He is driven by grief, obsession, and an unwillingness to let go of the past. This emotional foundation gives him more complexity than many blockbuster villains whose only objective is conquest for its own sake. The tragedy of Imhotep lies in the fact that he mistakes obsession for love. He believes that resurrecting Ankh-Sunamun and gaining limitless power will finally complete the life that was taken from him thousands of years earlier. However, throughout the film, the audience gradually realizes that his devotion has become unhealthy. He sacrifices innocent lives, manipulates countless followers, and threatens the entire world in pursuit of one impossible dream. This obsession serves as a direct contrast to Rick and Evelyn's relationship. Both men are motivated by love, but the nature of that love differs dramatically. Rick repeatedly risks himself to protect his family, placing their safety above his own desires. Imhotep, by comparison, demands that others suffer so that he may reclaim what he has lost. The film uses these opposing approaches to love as one of its central moral contrasts. Another reason Imhotep remains compelling is his intelligence. He is not simply a physically powerful monster. He understands ancient magic, manipulates people through persuasion, and carefully plans each stage of his resurrection. Even after thousands of years, he adapts quickly to changing circumstances. He studies his enemies, anticipates obstacles, and rarely acts impulsively. This strategic thinking makes him a more dangerous opponent. The heroes cannot simply overpower him. They must understand ancient mythology, solve historical mysteries, and exploit weaknesses within magical systems that few people even know exist. Imhotep also possesses remarkable charisma. Throughout the film, he commands loyalty from his followers not merely through fear, but through confidence and authority. His calm demeanor contrasts with the chaos he creates around him. Rather than shouting or displaying uncontrolled rage, he often speaks quietly and deliberately, reinforcing the impression that he has existed for thousands of years and possesses patience beyond ordinary human understanding. Arnold Vosloo's performance plays a crucial role in this effectiveness. He portrays Imhotep with dignity and restraint, allowing the character to appear regal even while committing terrible acts. This prevents him from becoming a cartoonish villain, and instead presents him as someone who genuinely believes he deserves another chance to fulfill his destiny. Ankh-Sunamun serves as the film's secondary human antagonist. While she shares many of Imhotep's goals, her personality differs significantly. She is driven more by survival, ambition, and self-interest than by genuine devotion. Throughout much of the story, she appears equally committed to restoring their ancient relationship, but subtle moments reveal a more selfish nature. Unlike Imhotep, whose love blinds him completely, Ankh-Sunamun consistently evaluates situations according to her own safety and advantage. This difference becomes especially important during the climax, when her true priorities are revealed. Her betrayal carries tremendous symbolic weight. Imhotep has sacrificed everything for her across multiple lifetimes, believing their love to be eternal. When she ultimately abandons him to save herself, the audience recognizes that the foundation of his entire quest was built upon an illusion. This moment transforms Imhotep from an all-powerful conqueror into a tragic figure. His greatest weakness is not magic or physical vulnerability, but misplaced trust. The cult of Imhotep functions as another major antagonistic force. These followers dedicate themselves entirely to resurrecting their ancient master and ensuring his return to power. Individually, they may not possess extraordinary abilities, but collectively they create constant obstacles for the heroes. What makes the cult effective is its unwavering loyalty. Unlike ordinary criminals motivated by money or personal gain, these followers believe they are participating in a sacred mission. Their religious devotion makes them willing to sacrifice themselves without hesitation. The Mummy Returns follows a story structure that closely aligns with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, while also incorporating elements of the three-act structure and the Save the Cat storytelling model. Although the film features several important protagonists, Rick O'Connell remains the central hero whose emotional and physical journey anchors the narrative. At the same time, Evelyn experiences her own parallel heroic arc, making the film somewhat unusual among blockbuster adventures. Rather than presenting a single chosen one destined to save the world alone, the story emphasizes partnership, family, and shared responsibility. This dual protagonist approach allows the movie to explore multiple forms of heroism while maintaining the familiar structure audiences instinctively recognize. One reason the hero's journey remains such an effective storytelling framework is that it reflects universal patterns found throughout myths, legends, and adventure stories across cultures. The Mummy Returns intentionally embraces these traditions. Ancient prophecies, supernatural mentors, hidden worlds, magical objects, symbolic death and rebirth, and final confrontations with overwhelming evil all fit naturally within Campbell's framework. However, Stephen Sommers adapts these classic stages to suit the tone of a modern action-adventure film filled with humor, romance, and spectacular action. The journey begins with what Campbell calls the ordinary world. Unlike the first film, Rick is no longer a wandering adventurer searching for his next opportunity. Several years have passed since his battle with Imhotep. He is now married to Evelyn, living comfortably in London, and raising their son Alex. On the surface, life appears stable. The dangerous adventures that once defined his existence have become memories rather than daily reality. Yet this ordinary world is intentionally different from that found in many heroes' journey stories. Rick's life is hardly ordinary by conventional standards. He and Evelyn continue participating in archaeological expeditions, collecting ancient artifacts, and studying forgotten civilizations. Their version of normal already contains more excitement than most people's extraordinary experiences. Nevertheless, compared to the supernatural conflict that soon unfolds, this peaceful family life represents the story's emotional baseline. Most importantly, the audience immediately understands what Rick now values most. In the original film, survival and romance drove much of his motivation. Here, family has become the center of his world. This establishes what is truly at stake long before the adventure begins. The next stage of the hero's journey is the call to adventure. This occurs when Alex accidentally places the bracelet of Anubis on his wrist. The magical artifact immediately transforms an archaeological discovery into a life-threatening crisis. Suddenly, ancient prophecies become personal. Rick and Evelyn are no longer investigating history out of curiosity. Their son has become directly connected to forces capable of reshaping the world. Unlike many heroes who initially refuse the call, Rick responds almost immediately. This reflects his personality as established in the first film. He has already survived supernatural threats and understands the danger they represent. There is no need for lengthy hesitation because he recognizes that immediate action is necessary. However, while Rick does not reject the adventure outright, he does experience a more subtle form of reluctance. As a father, he wishes to protect Alex from precisely this kind of danger. His desire for a peaceful family life conflicts with the reality that his past adventures have drawn his family back into the ancient world. This internal tension replaces the traditional refusal of the call. Rather than refusing to become a hero, Rick wishes his loved ones had never been forced into the situation at all. Campbell's next stage introduces mentors and allies. The Mummy Returns presents several figures fulfilling these roles simultaneously. Ardith Bey continues serving as Rick's spiritual guide and trusted ally. Unlike Rick, Ardith possesses generations of knowledge concerning ancient curses and supernatural threats. He understands the deeper mythology surrounding Anubis, the Scorpion King, and the hidden dangers awakening across Egypt. Evelyn also functions as both partner and mentor. Her expertise in archaeology and ancient languages repeatedly provides information essential for survival. Rather than acting solely as someone Rick must rescue, she contributes equally to solving the story's mysteries. Jonathan occupies a different mentoring role by reminding Rick of his humanity. Although comic relief dominates much of Jonathan's screen time, his loyalty reinforces the importance of family throughout the narrative. The crossing of the threshold occurs when the heroes leave the safety of London and return to Egypt. This physical journey symbolizes their transition from the familiar world into one governed by ancient magic and forgotten legends. From this point onward, ordinary rules no longer apply. The heroes enter a realm where mythology shapes reality. Crossing this threshold also marks the point at which retreat becomes impossible. Alex's connection to the bracelet of Anubis ensures that the family cannot simply abandon the mission. Every step forward becomes necessary for survival. Campbell describes the next phase as tests, allies, and enemies. This section occupies much of the film's running time. Rick and his companions encounter increasingly difficult challenges while strengthening their relationships with one another. These tests appear in many forms. Physical battles against mummies and supernatural creatures test Rick's courage. Ancient puzzles challenge Evelyn's intelligence. Jonathan repeatedly faces opportunities to choose loyalty over greed. Alex learns that bravery involves more than simply acting fearless. Meanwhile, enemies continue multiplying. Imhotep returns with renewed ambition. His followers pursue the bracelet of Anubis relentlessly. Ancient guardians defend sacred locations. Even the environment itself becomes hostile through collapsing temples, hidden traps, and unforgiving deserts. One of the defining characteristics of The Mummy Returns is its ambitious use of visual effects technology at a time when Hollywood was rapidly embracing digital filmmaking. Released in 2001, the film arrived during a transitional era in cinema. Computer-generated imagery had advanced significantly throughout the late 1990s, allowing filmmakers to attempt sequences that would have been impossible only a few years earlier. At the same time, practical effects, large physical sets, stunt work, miniatures, and makeup techniques were still essential components of blockbuster filmmaking. Rather than relying entirely on one approach, The Mummy Returns combined traditional filmmaking methods with emerging digital technology, creating a movie that reflected both the strengths and the growing pains of early 21st century visual effects. Director Stephen Sommers believed that visual effects should serve entertainment rather than exist purely as technical demonstrations. His goal was not to create realistic historical recreation, but to transport audiences into a heightened world where mythology, fantasy, and adventure could coexist naturally. Every technological decision supported this philosophy. Whether depicting resurrected mummies, magical armies, collapsing temples, or impossible creatures, the visual effects were designed to reinforce the feeling that viewers had entered a world where ancient legends had become reality. The first major technological achievement appears almost immediately during the opening sequence featuring the Scorpion King. Thousands of soldiers fill enormous battlefields, and the camera sweeps across landscapes that would have been extraordinarily difficult to create using practical methods alone. Digital crowd replication allowed filmmakers to generate massive armies without employing thousands of extras. Individual performers could be filmed repeatedly and then duplicated digitally to produce the illusion of enormous military forces stretching across the horizon. This approach dramatically expanded the scale of the film. Earlier adventure movies often suggested the presence of large armies while showing relatively few soldiers on screen. The Mummy Returns instead visualizes entire civilizations at war, immediately communicating that the sequel intends to operate on a much grander level than its predecessor. The environments themselves also benefited heavily from digital technology. Ancient Egypt, hidden temples, lost cities, towering monuments, underground chambers, and a legendary city of Shamshir combined practical construction with digital enhancement. Large physical sets were built to give actors real environments in which to perform, while computer-generated extensions expanded those sets far beyond what could be constructed on sound stages. This technique allowed enormous temples to appear miles across, gigantic statues to dominate entire landscapes, and underground chambers to extend into darkness far beyond the physical limitations of studio space. Rather than replacing practical filmmaking, CGI frequently served to extend and enhance existing locations. One of the movie's greatest technical accomplishments involves its depiction of Imhotep. Returning from the first film, the character once again undergoes numerous supernatural transformations. His body shifts between skeletal remains, partially regenerated flesh, and fully restored human appearance. These transitions required sophisticated digital morphing techniques, combined with makeup effects and careful performance planning. Arnold Vosloo often performed scenes physically, while digital artists later added supernatural transformations. This combination preserved the actor's facial expressions and body language while allowing impossible physical changes to occur seamlessly during the scene. This approach illustrates an important principle in visual effects. Technology works best when supporting performance rather than replacing it. Imhotep remains emotionally engaging because audiences continue recognizing Arnold Vosloo beneath the digital enhancements. The resurrection scenes throughout the movie showcase another blend of practical and digital techniques. Dust particles, magical energy, swirling sand, and dissolving bodies combine multiple layers of visual effects. Practical smoke, lighting effects, prosthetic makeup, and computer animation work together to create supernatural imagery that feels integrated into the physical environment. One of the film's most visually ambitious achievements is the creation of the army of Anubis. Thousands of jackal-headed warriors emerge across the battlefield during the climax, representing one of the largest, fully digital armies attempted at the time. Each warrior required detailed modeling, animation, texture work, and lighting before being multiplied into enormous formations. Creating believable movement presented a significant challenge. Individual soldiers needed to appear physically convincing while remaining synchronized during large-scale military formations. Animators studied both human soldiers and animal movement to create creatures that felt simultaneously recognizable and otherworldly. The resulting army reinforced the film's mythological scale. Instead of ordinary soldiers, audiences witnessed supernatural beings whose appearance immediately distinguished them from conventional historical armies. Perhaps the movie's most famous technological achievement, and also its most controversial, is the creation of the Scorpion King himself. During the climax, Dwayne Johnson's human face was digitally combined with an enormous scorpion body, creating a hybrid creature unlike anything seen earlier in the film. At the time, this represented an ambitious attempt to create a fully computer-generated creature capable of interacting directly with live actors during extended combat sequences. However, the available technology of 2001 struggled to achieve photorealism at this level of complexity. When people remember The Mummy Returns, the first images that often come to mind are its spectacular action sequences, supernatural creatures, and breathtaking visual effects. However, beneath the explosions, ancient curses, and larger-than-life adventure lies a surprisingly emotional story. The film succeeds not simply because of its spectacle, but because it gives audiences meaningful reasons to care about its characters. Every major action scene is supported by emotional stakes that make the danger feel personal rather than abstract. While the movie never presents itself as an emotional drama, it consistently uses relationships, sacrifice, loyalty, love, and family to create moments that resonate with viewers long after the adventure ends. One of the film's greatest emotional strengths is its focus on family. Unlike the original movie, which centered primarily on the developing romance between Rick O'Connell and Evelyn Carnahan, the sequel shifts its emotional core toward marriage and parenthood. Several years have passed since their first adventure, and the audience immediately sees that their relationship has matured. They're no longer strangers learning to trust one another. They have built a life together and now share the responsibility of raising their son, Alex. This simple change transforms nearly every emotional moment in the story. Instead of asking whether two people will fall in love, the film explores what people are willing to sacrifice to protect the family they have already created. That distinction makes the emotional stakes feel more mature and relatable. From the moment Alex becomes connected to the bracelet of Anubis, the audience understands that the adventure is no longer about treasure or archaeological discovery. It becomes a race to save a child. Every decision Rick and Evelyn make is influenced by their love for their son, and this emotional motivation grounds even the most fantastical moments. Parents watching the film often connect with Rick and Evelyn in a particularly personal way. Their fear whenever Alex is endangered feels genuine because it reflects a universal instinct to protect one's children. Even viewers without children can understand the depth of that devotion because the performances communicate authentic concern rather than exaggerated melodrama. Rick O'Connell's emotional journey is especially compelling because it demonstrates how much he has changed since the first film. In The Mummy, Rick was a charming adventurer who gradually discovered love. In The Mummy Returns, he has become something even more admirable. He is still brave, humorous, and resourceful, but now every act of courage serves a greater purpose. Rick repeatedly risks his own life without hesitation whenever Alex or Evelyn is threatened. These moments resonate emotionally because they are never portrayed as attempts to prove his heroism. Instead, they arise naturally from his identity as a husband and father. His willingness to sacrifice himself becomes an expression of love rather than a desire for glory. Brendan Fraser's performance contributes enormously to this emotional authenticity. One reason audiences continue to admire Rick decades after the film's release is that Fraser portrays him as approachable rather than invincible. Rick experiences fear. He worries about his family. He makes mistakes. He occasionally doubts himself. These human qualities make his acts of bravery far more inspiring than they would be if he appeared completely fearless. Evelyn's emotional arc provides another layer of depth. Throughout the film, she struggles with memories of Princess Nefertiti and gradually realizes that her connection to ancient Egypt extends beyond archaeology. At first, these visions confuse and frighten her. She begins questioning her own identity and wondering whether her life is somehow predetermined by events that occurred thousands of years earlier. This internal struggle creates one of the film's most meaningful emotional themes, the relationship between destiny and personal choice. Although Evelyn discovers that she shares a profound connection with the past, she refuses to become defined by it. Instead, she embraces her own life, her marriage, and her role as Alex's mother. The audience witnesses someone accepting history without allowing it to control her future. Rachel Weisz brings remarkable warmth to this journey. She portrays Evelyn as intelligent and courageous without sacrificing vulnerability. During quieter scenes, small expressions and subtle moments of uncertainty communicate emotional complexity that contrasts beautifully with the film's larger-than-life action sequences. Alex himself serves as more than simply the child who needs rescuing. He represents hope, curiosity, and the future. Throughout the movie, he repeatedly demonstrates courage beyond his years. Although frightened by the dangers surrounding him, he continues helping whenever possible. This bravery creates emotional investment because Alex never feels like an unrealistic child genius. He remains believable as a young boy, trying to imitate the courage of his parents while gradually discovering his own strength. The relationship between Alex and Rick also provides several touching moments. Rick treats his son with respect rather than constantly dismissing him as too young to contribute. Although he naturally wants to protect Alex, he also recognizes the importance of allowing him to grow. These interactions feel authentic because they balance parental concern with encouragement, creating a believable father-son relationship that resonates with many viewers. Another emotional pillar of the movie is the enduring partnership between Rick and Evelyn. Hollywood adventure sequels often create unnecessary romantic misunderstandings or jealousy simply to manufacture drama. The Mummy Returns avoids this entirely. Instead, the film presents one of the healthiest marriages found in blockbuster cinema. Rick and Evelyn trust one another completely. They argue occasionally under pressure, but their disagreements never undermine their mutual respect. This stability allows the audience to focus on external conflicts rather than artificial relationship problems. Their love is never in doubt, making every attempt to save one another feel sincere. Many fans continue to praise this relationship precisely because it avoids common cliches. Rick never feels threatened by Evelyn's intelligence. Evelyn never doubts Rick's loyalty. Each recognizes the other's strengths, creating a partnership built on equality. Unlike many major Hollywood blockbusters, The Mummy Returns is not a direct adaptation of a single novel, comic book, or historical document. Instead, it represents a continuation of a cinematic franchise that itself draws inspiration from multiple sources. To fully understand the film as an adaptation, it is necessary to look beyond the idea of adapting one specific piece of source material. The movie adapts mythology, history, earlier films, classic adventure serials, pulp fiction traditions, and ancient Egyptian legends into a modern action-adventure story. Rather than faithfully translating one existing work, Stephen Sommers and his creative team blended numerous influences together, reshaping them into something that felt both familiar and original. The most obvious source of inspiration is the original 1932 film The Mummy. That classic Universal Pictures production introduced audiences to Imhotep, an ancient Egyptian priest resurrected in the modern world through forbidden magic. While The Mummy Returns is technically a sequel to the 1999 film rather than the 1932 original, both modern movies inherit important concepts from Universal's early horror classic. However, Stephen Sommers never intended to create a faithful remake of the older films. Instead, he transformed their basic premise into a completely different style of storytelling. The original 1932 movie emphasized atmosphere, slow-building suspense, gothic horror, and tragic romance. The Mummy Returns instead embraces large-scale adventure, comedy, romance, fantasy, mythology, and blockbuster spectacle. This shift illustrates one of the most significant adaptation choices in the franchise. Rather than preserving the tone of the classic horror film, Sommers adapted only its central ideas while reinventing nearly everything else. The character of Imhotep provides one of the clearest examples of this process. In both the classic films and the modern series, Imhotep is motivated by love and resurrection. He seeks to reunite with the woman he lost in ancient Egypt, and his refusal to accept death drives the story forward. Yet the modern version expands the character considerably. The 1932 Imhotep relied largely on hypnotic powers, mystery, and quiet menace. Arnold Vosloo's interpretation retains the intelligence and emotional depth of the original, but transforms him into a physically powerful supernatural being capable of commanding armies, manipulating magical forces, and surviving enormous action sequences. This evolution reflects changing audience expectations across nearly 70 years of filmmaking. Early horror relied heavily upon suggestion and atmosphere, because technological limitations restricted what filmmakers could show. By 2001, audiences expected epic battles, elaborate visual effects, and large-scale action. The adaptation therefore modernized the character while preserving his emotional core. Ancient Egyptian mythology represents another major source adapted throughout the film. Rather than following historical or religious texts precisely, The Mummy Returns borrows recognizable names, symbols, gods, and locations before reshaping them to serve dramatic storytelling. Anubis, for example, appears throughout Egyptian mythology as the god associated with mummification, protection of tombs, and guidance into the afterlife. In the movie, however, Anubis becomes the creator of a supernatural army and the deity responsible for the bargain made with the Scorpion King. This portrayal differs significantly from traditional mythology. Historically, Anubis was not an evil figure. Instead, he played an important role in protecting souls during their journey through the afterlife. The film simplifies and alters this mythology by emphasizing his association with death and supernatural judgment rather than his broader religious significance. Similarly, the army of Anubis is entirely fictional. No ancient Egyptian legend describes an enormous army of jackal-headed warriors waiting to conquer the world. This concept was created specifically for the movie to provide an epic final conflict suitable for a modern blockbuster. The bracelet of Anubis also belongs entirely to the fictional mythology developed by the filmmakers. While ancient Egypt certainly produced numerous magical amulets and protective jewelry, no historical artifact functions like the bracelet depicted in the film. These creative additions demonstrate that the filmmakers were less interested in historical accuracy than in capturing the imaginative spirit of ancient mythology. The Scorpion King represents another fascinating example of adaptation through invention. Historically, there was a ruler known today as Scorpion King, sometimes identified as Scorpion II, who lived during the period before Egypt became a unified kingdom. Archaeological evidence suggests that he was an important early ruler, although relatively little is known about his life. The film transforms this obscure historical figure into a legendary warrior who makes a bargain with Anubis and becomes an immortal guardian. Virtually every aspect of this portrayal is fictional. Rather than attempting to reconstruct real history, the filmmakers use the historical name as a foundation upon which they build an entirely new myth. Interestingly, this fictional interpretation became so popular that it eventually inspired its own spin-off franchise starring Dwayne Johnson. In this unusual case, an invented version of a historical figure generated an entirely separate series of films disconnected from the original historical inspiration. The movie also adapts numerous conventions from pulp adventure fiction. Throughout the early 20th century, magazines featuring adventurous explorers, lost civilizations, cursed artifacts, hidden temples, and supernatural mysteries became enormously popular. Writers frequently blended archaeology with fantasy, creating stories in which forgotten worlds still existed beyond the reach of modern civilization. The Mummy Returns embraces nearly all of these traditions. Ancient maps reveal hidden cities. Magical artifacts unlock forgotten powers. Long-lost civilizations survive in isolated locations. Heroic explorers travel across dangerous landscapes. Ancient curses threaten the modern world. These familiar pulp elements are not adapted from one specific story, but from an entire literary tradition that shaped adventure fiction throughout the 20th century. One of the reasons The Mummy Returns remains enjoyable decades after its release is that it rewards repeat viewings. While casual audiences often remember the spectacular action scenes, supernatural creatures, and fast-paced adventure, viewers who return to the film multiple times begin noticing countless hidden details woven throughout the story. Some of these are subtle references to the first movie, others pay tribute to classic adventure cinema, while many foreshadow later events or quietly reinforce the film's central themes. Stephen Sommers filled the movie with visual callbacks, recurring symbols, mythology-based clues, and clever storytelling techniques that are easy to miss during a first viewing. Unlike modern blockbuster franchises that often hide obvious references intended primarily for internet discussion, many of The Mummy Returns' hidden details exist to strengthen the narrative itself. They reward attentive audiences without distracting viewers who simply want to enjoy the adventure. These details demonstrate the amount of planning that went into the screenplay, production design, costumes, dialogue, and cinematography. Perhaps the most significant hidden detail appears during the opening sequence involving the Scorpion King. At first, the sequence seems designed simply to establish an ancient legend. However, careful viewers eventually realize that nearly every major event later in the film has already been foreshadowed during these first few minutes. The bargain with Anubis establishes that power always comes at a terrible cost. The Scorpion King's transformation hints that seeking absolute strength ultimately destroys one's humanity. The hidden city of Shir is introduced long before it becomes the hero's destination. The army of Anubis is briefly shown, preparing audiences for its eventual return during the climax. These moments function as narrative seeds planted early, so that later revelations feel earned rather than random. The bracelet of Anubis itself contains several layers of symbolism that many viewers overlook. Beyond serving as a magical map, the bracelet represents the burden of knowledge. Once Alex places it on his wrist, he gains access to information unavailable to anyone else. However, that knowledge immediately becomes dangerous. This reflects one of the franchise's recurring themes. Discovering ancient secrets always carries consequences. Archaeology, curiosity, and learning are portrayed as admirable qualities throughout the series, but they must be balanced with wisdom and responsibility. Another subtle detail involves Evelyn's visions of Princess Nefertiti. During a first viewing, these sequences appear to function simply as supernatural flashbacks explaining ancient history. On repeated viewings, however, audiences notice that the visions gradually increase in clarity and emotional intensity. Initially, Evelyn seems confused by isolated images. Later, she begins recognizing locations. Eventually, she experiences complete memories. This progression mirrors her growing acceptance of her connection to the past. Rather than presenting all the information at once, the film allows both Evelyn and the audience to discover the truth gradually. The relationship between Rick and Imhotep contains numerous visual parallels. Although they occupy opposite sides of the conflict, Stephen Sommers frequently frames them similarly. Both lead groups into dangerous environments. Both repeatedly rescue the women they love. Both confront overwhelming supernatural forces without hesitation. Both refuse to abandon those closest to them. These similarities emphasize that the two characters possess many of the same heroic qualities. What ultimately separates them is not courage but motivation. Rick risks himself for others. Imhotep sacrifices others for himself. This visual mirroring reinforces one of the film's central moral contrasts. The movie also contains numerous callbacks to the first film. Rick continues displaying the same relaxed confidence that defined his earlier adventure. Jonathan remains obsessed with treasure despite repeatedly suffering the consequences. Ardith Bey still fulfills his role as protector against ancient evil. Even small gestures, expressions, and humorous exchanges echo relationships established during the original story. These callbacks create continuity without requiring constant verbal references to previous events. One particularly enjoyable recurring detail involves Jonathan's relationship with valuable artifacts. Throughout both films, he repeatedly attempts to claim treasure for himself, only for circumstances to interfere. This running joke continues in The Mummy Returns. Whenever Jonathan believes fortune has finally smiled upon him, some disaster inevitably follows. The humor works because it reflects his consistent personality rather than existing as isolated comedy. Alex serves as another source of subtle narrative echoes. Many of his actions resemble qualities previously displayed by both Rick and Evelyn. His curiosity mirrors Evelyn's love of discovery. His courage resembles Rick's willingness to face danger. Even his occasional impulsiveness combines traits inherited from both parents. These similarities quietly reinforce the idea that Alex truly belongs within this adventurous family. Several visual motifs recur throughout the movie. Doors, gateways, tunnels, and hidden passages appear repeatedly. On a literal level, these simply function as locations within ancient temples. Symbolically, however, they represent transitions between worlds. Characters continually cross boundaries, separating present from past, life from death, ordinary reality from mythology. Nearly every major turning point occurs after passing through some form of doorway or threshold. The Mummy Returns was not only one of the biggest action-adventure films of 2001, but it also represented one of Universal Pictures' most important franchise investments during the early 21st century. Following the enormous success of 1999's The Mummy, the studio recognized that it possessed a valuable property capable of attracting audiences around the world. Sequels are often produced because of financial opportunity, but The Mummy Returns carried particularly high expectations. The original film had transformed what many considered an outdated Universal monster into a modern blockbuster franchise, and the sequel needed to prove that the success had not been a one-time phenomenon. From a business perspective, The Mummy Returns demonstrates how Hollywood studios expand successful intellectual properties into long-term franchises. Beyond simply earning money at the box office, the film was expected to strengthen Universal's brand, increase merchandise sales, support home entertainment releases, inspire future sequels, and create new opportunities for spin-off projects. In many respects, its financial performance exceeded these expectations and helped shape Universal's blockbuster strategy throughout the early 2000s. One of the first major business decisions involved increasing the production budget significantly compared to the original film. The success of The Mummy gave Universal confidence that audiences wanted a larger, more ambitious sequel. As a result, the filmmakers received substantially greater financial resources to expand nearly every aspect of production. The reported production budget was approximately $98 million. At the time, this represented a major investment. While not the most expensive movie ever produced, it placed The Mummy Returns firmly within the category of high-budget summer blockbusters. Universal clearly believed that increasing production value would attract even larger audiences than the original film. The larger budget became visible throughout the finished movie. Visual effects were more ambitious. Action sequences became significantly larger. International filming expanded the scale of production. Set construction increased dramatically. Costumes, creatures, and environments all reflected the studio's willingness to invest heavily in spectacle. Rather than producing a modest continuation, Universal positioned the sequel as a major cinematic event. Marketing represented another enormous financial commitment. The advertising campaign emphasized several key ideas. First, audiences would reunite with the popular cast from the original film. Second, the action would be bigger and more spectacular. Third, entirely new mythology, including the Scorpion King, would expand the franchise's universe. Television commercials highlighted massive battle scenes, supernatural creatures, and Brendan Fraser's return as Rick O'Connell. Movie posters focused on recognizable imagery associated with ancient Egypt while introducing new visual elements connected to the Scorpion King and the Bracelet of Anubis. The marketing deliberately presented the sequel as both familiar and larger than its predecessor. Universal also benefited from strong audience awareness created by the first movie. Unlike entirely original films that must introduce unfamiliar worlds and characters, The Mummy Returns could rely upon viewers already recognizing Rick, Evelyn, Imhotep, Jonathan, and the overall tone of the franchise. This existing audience significantly reduced one of Hollywood's greatest business risks, convincing people to try something completely unknown. The release strategy played an equally important role. The film debuted during the highly competitive summer movie season, traditionally the period when studios release their largest blockbusters. Summer audiences generally seek exciting entertainment featuring action, humor, visual spectacle, and broad family appeal. The Mummy Returns matched these expectations almost perfectly. Rather than competing through awards prestige or dramatic storytelling, it positioned itself as a major event designed for large theatrical audiences. Opening weekend performance immediately demonstrated the strength of audience interest. The movie earned an exceptionally large domestic opening, breaking several records at the time and becoming one of the strongest openings in Universal Pictures history up to that point. This immediate success indicated that anticipation had remained extremely high following the original film. Strong opening weekends matter enormously in Hollywood economics. They generate media attention. Positive headlines encourage additional ticket sales. Theaters devote more screens to successful films. Studios gain confidence regarding future franchise investments. The Mummy Returns benefited from all of these advantages. Its worldwide theatrical performance proved even more impressive. The film earned well over $430 million globally during its theatrical run. Compared to its approximately $98 million production budget, this represented a highly successful financial return even before considering home entertainment revenue, television licensing, merchandising, and other secondary income sources. International markets contributed significantly to this success. The adventurous tone, emphasis on visual storytelling, and relatively universal themes of family, courage, and mythology translated effectively across different countries. Unlike dialogue-heavy dramas that sometimes struggle internationally, action-adventure films often appeal to diverse audiences regardless of language. The Mummy Returns performed particularly well in numerous overseas territories, reinforcing Universal's confidence that the franchise possessed worldwide appeal. When evaluating profitability, it is important to recognize that production budgets do not represent total expenses. Marketing campaigns, international distribution, theater revenue sharing, and promotional partnerships all increase overall costs. Nevertheless, the movie remained comfortably profitable. Industry analysts generally consider the film one of Universal's major commercial successes during that period. Its financial performance justified continued investment in the franchise. Home entertainment became another major source of revenue. During the early 2000s, DVD sales were experiencing extraordinary growth. Few adventure films from the early 2000s have maintained the kind of loyal fan following that The Mummy Returns continues to enjoy more than 2 decades after its release. While many blockbuster movies perform well during their theatrical run before gradually fading for public conversation, The Mummy Returns has remained part of online discussions, fan communities, conventions, and nostalgic movie marathons for years. Its popularity has evolved across generations, with viewers who originally watched the film as children introducing it to younger audiences, creating a cycle of appreciation that has helped keep the franchise alive long after its original release. One of the most interesting aspects of the Mummy Returns fandom is that it developed naturally rather than through aggressive franchise planning. In 2001, social media platforms did not yet dominate entertainment discussions. Fans primarily connected through internet forums, movie websites, fan clubs, message boards, magazines, and early fan-created websites. These communities allowed viewers to analyze scenes, debate mythology, share artwork, discuss favorite characters, and speculate about future installments. Unlike modern franchises that often rely on constant online marketing, The Mummy Returns built much of its fan base through word of mouth and repeated viewings. As home video became increasingly popular during the early 2000s, many viewers watched the film dozens of times. Repeated exposure strengthened emotional connections to the characters and encouraged fans to notice details they had missed during earlier viewings. One reason the fan community remains remarkably active is the enduring popularity of Rick O'Connell. Brendan Fraser's performance has become one of the defining action heroes of his generation. Fans consistently praise Rick because he differs from many traditional blockbuster protagonists. He is courageous without becoming arrogant. He is physically capable without appearing invincible. He is humorous without undermining serious moments. He respects the intelligence of those around him. He openly expresses love for his family. These qualities have helped Rick age exceptionally well in the eyes of audiences. In online discussions, he is frequently described as one of the most likable adventure heroes ever created. Many fans appreciate that Rick never needs to dominate every situation. Instead, he works alongside Evelyn, Ardith Bay, Jonathan, and eventually Alex. This collaborative approach makes him feel more approachable than many action heroes who solve every problem alone. Evelyn Carnahan has developed an equally passionate fan following. Rachel Weisz's portrayal is often celebrated because the character successfully combines intelligence, vulnerability, courage, humor, and emotional warmth. Unlike many female characters in action films from the same period, Evelyn is never reduced to simply supporting the male protagonist. She frequently solves the story's most important historical mysteries. Her archaeological expertise repeatedly saves the group. She participates directly in action sequences. She remains emotionally complex throughout the story. As discussions surrounding female representation in adventure films have evolved over the years, many fans have revisited Evelyn as an example of a character who balanced traditional femininity with genuine competence and independence. The relationship between Rick and Evelyn has become one of the franchise's greatest strengths within fan culture. Many movie fans describe them as one of Hollywood's healthiest action-adventure couples. Unlike relationships built around constant misunderstandings or dramatic breakups, Rick and Evelyn demonstrate mutual trust, respect, and affection throughout both films. This dynamic has inspired countless discussions comparing them favorably to relationships found in other blockbuster franchises. Fans frequently point out that Rick admires Evelyn's intelligence rather than feeling threatened by it. Likewise, Evelyn respects Rick's instincts and courage. Neither attempts to overshadow the other. Instead, they function as equal partners. This balance has become increasingly appreciated as audiences revisit older films. Alex O'Connell initially received more mixed reactions when the movie first premiered. Some viewers worried that introducing a child would reduce the adventurous tone established by the original film. However, many opinions soften over time. Later audiences often appreciate that Alex contributes meaningfully to the narrative rather than existing solely as someone needing rescue. His curiosity, bravery, and intelligence reflect qualities inherited from both parents. As viewers who originally watched the movie during childhood grew older, many found themselves relating more strongly to Alex than they had previously. Jonathan Carnahan remains one of the fandom's favorite comedic characters. Numerous fans cite him as providing the perfect balance between humor and genuine loyalty. Although Jonathan frequently complains, seeks treasure, and attempts to avoid danger, he repeatedly proves that he values his family more than personal wealth. This recurring character trait has made him especially memorable. Fans often quote his funniest lines and celebrate his ability to lighten even the darkest moments without completely undermining dramatic tension. Ardith Bay has also earned significant admiration. Many viewers consider him one of the franchise's most underrated characters. His quiet confidence, unwavering sense of duty, and centuries-old mission create an air of mystery that distinguishes him from the more energetic personalities surrounding him. Fans frequently express interest in learning more about the Magi and their history, demonstrating how successfully the film expanded its fictional universe. One fascinating aspect of The Mummy Returns fandom involves appreciation for its tone. Modern audiences often describe the film as representing a style of blockbuster filmmaking that has become increasingly rare. It combines adventure, fantasy, horror, romance, comedy, and family drama without allowing any one genre to dominate completely. Many fans argue that contemporary blockbusters often emphasize either excessive seriousness or nonstop comedy. The Mummy Returns is frequently praised for finding a balance between emotional sincerity and entertaining fun. This tonal consistency contributes significantly to the movie's enduring popularity. When The Mummy Returns premiered in 2001, it was received as one of the biggest blockbuster events of the year. Audiences filled theaters. The film earned hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide, and Universal Pictures celebrated another major commercial success. At the time, however, critical reactions were more divided. Many reviewers praised the movie's entertainment value, charismatic cast, humor, and nonstop action, while others argued that it relied too heavily on spectacle, increased the scale beyond what was necessary, and sacrificed some of the balance that had made the original film such a surprise hit. More than 2 decades later, the conversation surrounding The Mummy Returns has changed considerably. Modern audiences now view the film through a very different cultural and cinematic lens. Instead of comparing it only to its predecessor, viewers compare it to the many blockbuster franchises that followed. This broader perspective has led to a significant reassessment of the movie's strengths, weaknesses, and lasting legacy. While certain aspects have aged less successfully than others, the film has generally experienced an improvement in reputation among audiences, becoming one of the most fondly remembered adventure films of the early 2000s. One of the biggest reasons for this reassessment is nostalgia. Many people who first watched The Mummy Returns during childhood are now adults. For them, the movie represents more than simply an action-adventure film. It recalls a particular era of blockbuster filmmaking, family movie nights, DVD collections, and summer cinema experiences. Nostalgia alone does not guarantee lasting popularity, but it encourages viewers to revisit movies with fresh eyes. In the case of The Mummy Returns, many audiences have discovered that the film holds up better than they remembered in several important ways. Perhaps the most frequently praised aspect of the modern reassessment is Brendan Fraser's performance as Rick O'Connell. Over the years, Fraser has experienced an extraordinary resurgence in public appreciation. Audiences increasingly recognize not only his talent as a dramatic actor, but also his remarkable skill as an action hero. When viewers revisit The Mummy Returns today, many notice qualities they may have overlooked during the original release. Rick is courageous without becoming arrogant. He is funny without mocking the story. He is physically capable while remaining vulnerable. He deeply loves his family. He treats every member of his team with respect. These characteristics have become even more appreciated as audiences compare Rick to later action heroes who often rely more heavily on sarcasm, emotional detachment, or overwhelming physical power. Modern viewers frequently describe Rick O'Connell as refreshingly sincere. He represents a hero who succeeds because of courage, compassion, and determination rather than cynicism. Rachel Weisz's portrayal of Evelyn has similarly received increased admiration. As conversations surrounding female representation in blockbuster cinema have evolved, many critics and fans have re-examined Evelyn as an unusually well-written adventure heroine. Rather than existing solely as a love interest, she contributes intellectually, emotionally, and physically throughout the story. She possesses expertise that repeatedly saves the group. She actively participates in combat. She experiences meaningful character development. Her relationship with Rick is based upon partnership rather than dependence. Many modern viewers argue that Evelyn remains one of the strongest female protagonists produced during the era. Another element receiving greater appreciation today is the relationship between Rick and Evelyn. Contemporary audiences frequently describe them as one of the healthiest married couples in blockbuster filmmaking. Unlike many action films that create unnecessary romantic conflict simply to generate drama, The Mummy Returns presents two people who genuinely trust and support one another. Their marriage feels stable. Their affection feels natural. Their teamwork feels authentic. As viewers compare this relationship to those found in many later franchises, appreciation for its maturity has grown significantly. The movie's emphasis on family has also aged surprisingly well. Modern blockbuster cinema often focuses on world-ending threats, multiverse catastrophes, or enormous cosmic conflicts. Although The Mummy Returns certainly includes epic stakes involving ancient armies and supernatural forces, the emotional core remains intensely personal. Rick and Evelyn are ultimately trying to save their son. This straightforward motivation gives the spectacle emotional grounding. Modern audiences often praise the film for remembering that even the largest adventure should remain connected to human relationships. The practical aspects of the filmmaking have likewise benefited from reassessment. While discussions at the time often focused primarily on groundbreaking computer-generated imagery, contemporary viewers increasingly appreciate the movie's practical stunt work, physical sets, costumes, and location photography. Many action sequences continue feeling energetic because they rely upon real performers interacting with tangible environments. This combination of practical craftsmanship and digital enhancement has become more noticeable as audiences compare the film with productions relying almost entirely upon computer-generated environments. Of course, no modern reassessment of The Mummy Returns can ignore the Scorpion King. Perhaps no visual effect from the early 2000s has become as famous for aging poorly. The fully computer-generated creature created for the climax frequently appears in online discussions as an example of the limitations of early digital technology. Viewers often acknowledge that the sequence no longer appears realistic by contemporary standards. However, something interesting has happened over the years. Rather than damaging the movie's reputation significantly, the Scorpion King has almost become an affectionate part of its identity.